In Advaita Vedanta, they say, I am Brahman. I am pure consciousness, one without a second. So they actually name the absolute, call it Brahman, which just means the vast or the limitless. Buddhists don't do that, generally speaking, because they'll use the word sunyata, which means emptiness. It means basically that it's ungraspable, unnameable, and any attempt to name or grasp it mentally is an error, because that's just the mind. The mind grasps and names. The Sanskrit word nama rupa means name and form. So anything that's name and form is not ultimately real. It's like a phantom that we're projecting onto things. So the Buddhists basically don't want you to think of an absolute reality of some kind that we can grasp or even subtly think about or understand mentally, because that's an error and that's not it. So they'll say shunya, empty. What is the ultimate nature of reality? There isn't one, in a sense. In Buddhism, this false attribution of reality to objects of the mind is meditated upon until the realization arises that it's not real, it's not substantial. And then whatever's left is reality. But it's shunya, it's empty. It doesn't have any attribute. It's nothing that can be named. And so it's really strict in that way, generally speaking. There are forms of Buddhism in Tibet, such as Dzogchen, that calls reality rigpa, which means primordial awareness. And it's self-luminous. The luminosity of awareness is not anything other than the light of consciousness that is reality itself. And in that sense, it's similar to Advaita Vedanta. Is it empty? What empty means is don't try to grasp it. You cannot know it. You cannot speak it. When that's understood fully, that self-luminous reality becomes obvious as who we are and as the reality of everything. The terminal conclusions of Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta, it's very technical, but they're basically referring to the same reality, just it's empty. And I think we have teachings that are for monks who are learning the system, the scaffolding, if you will. The scaffolding is a structure that's built philosophically, mentally, perhaps even physically, having to do with temples that are built, books that are written, physical things. But the ideas that are, in a way, a ladder or scaffolding to get you to nirvana or ultimate realization, those are very strict. They've been worked out, hammered out over hundreds or thousands of years. And so when you get to some of the highest teachings in Tibet, the standard teachings, they'll say that the ultimate reality is shunya, it's empty. And the reason is they don't want you to try to grasp it. The grasping is the problem, so don't try to grasp it. Like, emptiness means non-grasping. The strictness of those teachings generally has to do with the training of young monks, and it's very strict in that sense. Just like any pedagogical instruction that you go through is very strict. You learn the rules, you learn the methods, you learn them in an orthodox, by-the-book kind of way. So the Buddhists have their teachings along those lines, and the Advaitins have their teachings along those lines. Very precise, very distinct philosophical differences there. And in that sense, they don't agree, because it's still in the mind. The descriptions that we use to get to the realization are all refined elements of the mind, of the intellect. So philosophy gets more and more refined. And those areas on the scaffolding, you could say, they get higher and higher. They disagree. They don't really agree exactly. But once that jumping off happens into reality itself, the realization itself, those distinctions don't exist. You realize that any of those separate distinctions, religions, philosophies, that they're all different because they're using language. They're using the mind. as a tool to get where you want to go. There's one reality. Some teachings are less for monks being trained in the very strict technical sense and more for just people that want to wake up. That's what this teaching is. I'm not training monks here. It's not monastic at all. It's just traditionally it was monastic to a large extent. Now that we're looking at it, a lot of what we have are monastic teachings in the texts that were left behind, and then we think that those distinctions really matter, those really hair-splitting distinctions. They matter in academia, maybe. Most of us are not monastic or not monastically trained, and I don't know how many monks are listening to this. Any monks that are learning Buddhism, doing the system of Buddhism in the monastic sense, they're probably not watching this because they have their own teachers and their own texts and their own world they're dealing with, and that's fine. This is not a monastic teaching, strictly speaking. So the teachers we have, who are just basically people who woke up and are popular teachers in that way and just trying to describe the reality and how to realize it. Like I might jump from Buddhism to Advaita Vedanta. It's syncretic, you could say. Syncretism is the blending or merging of different, often contradictory beliefs, cultures, or philosophies into a new cohesive system. That's the basic idea. That's from Google. Another word is eclectic. We're taking disparate or different elements from these traditions that are valid and making our own path. Because I did that when I was learning. I read books on Christian mysticism. I read books on Buddhism. I read books on Advaita Vedanta. They were all legitimate and yet represent different sections on this scaffolding. And it produced the realization that I'm calling awakening, and it's clear to me that I don't need to be too careful with those distinctions because I wasn't as a student and it works. So I'm saying they point at the same reality. There's only one reality, and it's wordless. It's not a concept. So whether you say it's shunya, empty, you don't grasp at it, great, I get that. I understand why that would be an instruction. Or saying it's Brahman, I am Brahman, limitless, infinite consciousness. Infinite, we cannot really describe or capture infinity mentally. Either way you look at it, use one that works for you. These are all just descriptions. That's one of the mind-blowing things about this. I've talked about this before, but arguing about these really fine points often is what I call worshiping the sign to Los Angeles. If we think of Los Angeles as being a symbol of realization of the ultimate reality, I mean, it's called the City of Angels. I don't know. Does it live up to the name? You tell me. But let's say that you're trying to get to Los Angeles and you're walking on I-10 and you see a sign and it says Los Angeles and has an arrow pointing toward Los Angeles, which means go that way. And yet you see the sign, like, oh, that's the correct sign. Oh, and you stay there and you worship the sign. You're missing the point. Because if you're on I-5, approaching from the north, for example, it's an entirely different direction. In a way, it's an entirely different system. It's a different sign. And it says, no, Los Angeles is this way. And they're all pointing. One's pointing this way and one's pointing that way. The reality is what we want. We want to get to Los Angeles. So it doesn't matter. As long as you follow the signs, the correct signs. Let's assume that we're following the correct signs. There are a lot of signs, perhaps, that point the wrong way, and we don't want to follow those. But let's just say, if we take all the right signs that point to Los Angeles, take them together, they're all valid, as long as they point the way. And they do. The ones on the interstate or the ones on the maybe different state highways. So the whole point of the sign that points to Los Angeles is to go to Los Angeles. Don't argue about your particular sign and whether it's legitimate or not. If it's legitimate, use it. Leave it behind immediately. You take steps and that sign recedes into the distance. There will be another one down the way, more refined in a sense because you're getting closer to Los Angeles. When you get to Los Angeles, there aren't any signs because you're in Los Angeles. You don't need any signs. So what I'm saying is use the signs or use the scriptures, the teachings, the words, the scaffolding, whatever you want to call that, the means. Use the ones that work for you. And sometimes we may, because we're not strictly a Buddhist, monastically or otherwise, we're not strictly a Hindu or a Christian, we're just a human being born in a certain set of circumstances. And because we have the internet, we have libraries, we have access to the whole world's literature for the most part, sacred literature and otherwise, we can draw together those threads that make sense to us, that point the way collectively, and we're basically forging a new path based on the teachings from the past. And it's really okay to do that as long as we're really careful about listening to those who have realized it. The ones who know Los Angeles, or in some sense are Los Angeles. So I call that a true teacher. And you can't really prove that someone is a true teacher objectively. We don't have that. I don't know of any real system of checking that with absolute certainty, except listening within yourself. You get a sense of what the truth is. 2 + 2 = 4. The earth is basically spherical. Basic truths that we learn. We learn the truth. We learn relative truths. And then we use that to determine what absolute truth is. And we have to listen within ourselves because we do know what it is because we are what it is. Really what we're doing is looking at all the bad ideas that we were given as children and as young adults about who we are and dismantling those because they don't make sense. If we look at them closely, they don't make sense and they cause a sense of suffering, or it could be just alienation or fear, worry, what's going to happen to me kind of stuff. Like birth, death, this is crazy. What's going on here? Those kinds of questions. So I wouldn't worry too much about whether the ultimate reality is purnam or shunyam, empty or full. I've heard it described as a full, solid emptiness. It's ultimately real and true, and yet without attributes. The final statement on it is, I am that.